Okay guys, time once again for another incredibly thrilling video of my big dumb face. This time we got a question from Scott who says, managing volume through a yearly plan in Olympic weightlifting. Are there certain amounts of volume you want to accomplish in certain phases of the year? Do you stick with Prilepin's chart? That's the part I want to focus on real quick because that's a common question and I wouldn't say I'm passionate about it, but I definitely have some very solid opinions on it. I don't use Prilepin's chart. I never have, and I've never met a weightlifting coach who does. It's certainly popular within the powerlifting community as far as I know. Not a part of that community, so this is, of course, just me looking from the outside in. But let me explain why I don't use it and why I don't find it particularly valuable. I'm not saying it's useless. I'm just saying don't rely on it for anything, really. First of all, this thing was put together in 1975 by the Soviet national coach, weightlifting coach, who looked at 2 5-week mesocycles from, I believe, a couple thousand different weightlifters, Soviet weightlifters, and then essentially averaged out the numbers they were doing to come up with these figures. So you're talking about a lot of people, but they're all training in very similar manners. It's also a limited amount of time, which means that you're not seeing the broad range of training variable modulation through the course of an entire macro cycle, certainly not through the course of a year. So, I mean, that alone makes it kind of questionable in its value. But more importantly, the first big issue is the enormous range of numbers. You're looking at 10% ranges in intensity, and then you have considerable ranges in reps and total volume to consider too. To add to that first part too is this is based strictly on snatch and clean and jerk numbers. It has absolutely nothing to do with squats, pulls, pressing variations, good mornings, RDLs. None of that stuff factors into it. Only snatch and clean and jerk. So again, we're looking at pretty big ranges, which, okay, so we've got, say, 80 to 90 or 80 to 89% range. The rep range is 2 to 4 reps. The range of volume is 10 to 20 reps. That's a lot of difference. So let's just say we're at 89%, the top end of that range. I don't know many lifters who could snatch 89% for 4 reps. They might be able to squat it. They can certainly pull it because that percentage of the pull is being taken off a snatch. So that's not even that heavy of a pull. So you could have one lifter who is totally capable of that number and another lifter for whom it's literally impossible. So that's a problem. Just way too big of ranges. But of course, those ranges, that doesn't really matter because the chart doesn't take into account a huge amount of variability among lifters. So you have these numbers set out there, but you're not taking into account the variation in age, in training age, in body weight, in kind of what their previous training history is. So, have they been training very high frequency, high intensity, low volume, or have they been training high volume, relatively low intensity? These things very much influence what a lifter is not only capable of doing in terms of intensity and volume, but what they respond best to. And because it is based only on snatch and clean and jerk, those are lifts that are predicated on a certain amount of technical proficiency, meaning that if we try to apply those same numbers to something with very little skill component like a back squat, you're going to have totally different results. Like I said, so 80% for 2 to 4 reps in a back squat, it's not that big of a deal. It's not that difficult. So again, you're trying to take this thing that was not even prescriptive originally, it was descriptive of what people were doing on average in a certain amount of time, with a certain type of training, and you're trying to apply it to this enormous range of not only people but training situations and exercises. And then finally, it doesn't provide for any guidance for the modulation of these training variables throughout a single week, throughout a mesocycle, throughout a macro cycle, throughout a year. So, okay, let's say we squat 3 days a week, which is very common for weightlifters. Are we doing the exact same workout each time? I mean, intuitively, you know, probably not, but you wouldn't know that by looking at this chart. You know, if we snatch 2 or 3 days a week, what are we doing? The same workout? Probably not. But again, unless we have knowledge outside of this chart, we don't know. So my point being that with this chart in hand, you still cannot write training programming without the possession of a great deal of totally unrelated knowledge and experience. You know, you can write a program and then kind of reverse engineer it and look back at Prilepin's chart and say, you know, are these numbers that I assigned kind of falling within this range, and use that as kind of a bit of a reality check, I suppose. But even then, again, if you have enough knowledge to put together a training program, you're not going to assign somebody sets of 10 in the snatch at 90%, right? You know better than that. So my bottom line point here is that I don't see it providing a lot of value for actually writing programs. You have to know and have the experience way beyond this chart in order for it to even begin to be useful, and even then you don't need it. So certainly don't look at Prilepin's chart as a method, which I've heard it referred to as, you know, oh, I program based on Prilepin's chart. Well, what does that even mean? Because as we just talked about, there's really no way to program based on Prilepin's chart. You have to program based on totally unrelated things that are not included in that chart. So my suggestion would be have a look at it for curiosity's sake, kind of notice the trend, as in the lighter the weight, the higher the reps, the more volume you're going to do. The heavier the weight, the lower the reps, the less volume you're going to do. And then don't ever worry about it again. And you just have to move on with your life and you know, gain experience training and programming and looking at successful programs and kind of synthesizing all that information in order to be able to write quality programming yourself.